And from what I've heard from other students, the hardest part is the middle, trying to figure out what to fill in, correct? So really what you're doing is you're just looking at your picture and labeling all the parts that are congruent. That's it. That's all you're doing. And that's what we practiced on that pink sheet where we wrote what was congruent with side angle side and we wrote what was congruent with angle side angle, correct? That was our whole goal of those activities, was to list it. So let's open our first question for side, side, side. And let's look at number 2 and talk about how we proved that that was congruent by side, side, side. Now, what is the first thing that we do every single time? State the given. So we wrote down that B is the midpoint of AC. Well, what does it mean for something to be the midpoint? It's in the middle and it cuts it in half. So then it makes 2 congruent parts. Anytime you see midpoint, it's going to be 2 congruent parts and you're going to use definition of the midpoint every single time. Does that help at all? So if you see this, you're going to use definition of a midpoint. Now, after we said it was the midpoint, we told that the parts were congruent by the definition of a midpoint, and we put our tickies. And then it gave us our other congruence, right? And we wrote given. Now, why did we say that DB was congruent to DB?
It's in the middle. They share a side.
It's in the middle. They share a side, so it has to be congruent to itself. So that's how we got side, side, side. Was side, side, side that difficult, or was it once we started getting to the parallel lines? Okay, what about side, angle, side? How do we feel about that one?
That was alright.
Would you like to explain it again like you just did last?
Yeah. Okay. Alright, so can we do number 4, or do you want me to do number 3?
4.
Okay, so 4 started with that M is the midpoint of LP and NO. So we wrote that down. We wrote down our given. And then because it told us it was the midpoint of LP, which is this segment, we're going to ignore everything else. And we're only going to look at that segment. Okay? So we're ignoring everything else except for that segment. If it's the midpoint, that means it cuts it in half. So we would then say that this side is congruent to this side. Is that what we wrote down?
Yes.
And we wrote down definition of midpoint because we know that if it says midpoint, we're going to use definition of midpoint. Now, not only is it the midpoint of LP, but it's also the midpoint of what? So then we ignore everything else. We look at NO. If it cuts it in half, that means it has 2 congruent parts. So NM is congruent to OM. Do we agree or disagree so far? And that's why I wrote that down. Now, we don't know anything about these other 2 sides, so we're not going to use side, side, side. It didn't tell us anything about the third one. But we do know that it makes what kind of angles? And what do we know about vertical angles? They're congruent. Good. So we said that angle LMN is congruent to PMO by vertical angles. So then we have a side, we have an angle, and we have a side. We have a side, we have an angle, and then we have a side. So we said that those were congruent. Does that help on side, angle, side?
Yes.
Okay. Are we ready to look at angle, side, angle? Okay. Did anybody finish working on this for homework? Awesome. So excited that I give you assignments and you don't do it. You're going to do well in life. I can't wait for you to tell your boss that one day. Alright, so let's look at number 6. The first thing it told us was that C was the midpoint of what? AD. So we drew tickies here. So what can we say after C is the midpoint? AC is congruent to DC? If we start from the outside and we go in, should we start from the outside over here and go in? So it would be what? CD. And what is the reason that they're congruent? What did he say? Okay. Definition of midpoint. Take a point if you said definition of midpoint. Okay. Look at the way the triangle is shaped, though.
Yeah, they're not there. They're not side by side.
They're not backwards like the others have been. It's like picking this up and just moving it over. You know what I mean, Butterbean? Okay, now, it tells us that AB is parallel to what? CE. So I'm going to put the little triangles on AB, and I'm going to put the other little triangle on CE, or the arrow, rather. Do we have any other parallel lines?
Yes.
Which one?
Easy.
Alright, so we're going to put 2 arrows and 2 arrows. Okay. Now, does it tell us anything about the length of AB or the length of CE? Alright, so we're not going to worry about sides other than AC and CD. Does it tell us anything about the length of BC and the length of ED? So we're not going to worry about those sides. Can we all snap out of our zombie and pay attention and put our phones away and not pretend like we're texting in our lap, because angels don't just fall in your lap? Okay, thanks. Now, if these 2 lines are parallel, ignore this other side. Those 2 lines are parallel. That means this is a transversal. And if we have angles in the same position, what kind of angles are those? They are congruent, but it starts with a C. Corresponding. Good. Take a point. So angle A right here would be congruent to this angle over here, correct? Because they're corresponding angles. They're in the same position. So we would say angle BAC is congruent to what angle? Good job. Take a point. ECD by corresponding angles. Does everybody see how we got the corresponding angles?
Yes, ma'am.
One person does, so the rest of you are lost. Okay. Does anybody know how to speak?
Yes.
Okay, can you tell me if you understand how we got this? Or if you don't understand, tell me. Okay, so you see how these 2 lines are parallel? Alright, so if they're parallel, that makes this the transversal. So it's like if I drew, I'm going to redraw it on a separate piece. I have a parallel line here, a parallel line here. Okay, so those are the sides of that triangle. And then I have the bottom of that triangle is right here. Now, corresponding angles mean they're in the same position, right? So this angle right here is in the same position as this angle right here. So that means that they're congruent. Does that help if you see it like that? Okay. And if you need to redraw it like that, especially on the parallel lines, redraw it. That's fine. Put a piece of paper over it, trace it out. Yes.
This is something that was on the project, right?
Yes. And we had a poster, but it's being laminated so that we can have it forever, so it'll be back. Alright, now we have other parallel lines, correct? Now let's draw over those. They are here, and here, and here. Now, do we have any angles that could be congruent from those parallel lines that are maybe in the same position? Which one? Right here? Alright, so if I put 2 rainbows here and this one, are those congruent? Are they corresponding angles? Now, where is that in our picture? Angle D, and then this angle C, correct? Alright, so then that's angle ACB is congruent to angle CDE by corresponding angles. Now, I know that the hardest part is filling it in. So on your test and your activity that we're going to do, you're going to have some parts filled in, and then you're going to have a word bank. So don't freak out. Like, you're going to have parts that you're going to know where it goes. When we get back from Thanksgiving. Probably Wednesday, maybe that Thursday. Alright, now, we have an angle, we have a side, we have an angle. We have an angle, we have a side, we have an angle. So how are those triangles congruent? Now, before you just say that you don't understand and you're completely lost, read back through this proof. Remember how we found those, and then ask questions. Don't just sit there and stare off into space like you're zombies and it's Friday and you're ready to be out of here because we still have to do work. So read back through the proof. Does anybody have any questions? Is everybody good on how we got that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Ready to look at angle, angle, side? Okay. Now, I want you to fill in at least the first 3 lines without me. Look at the given, look at the parallel, see if you can do part of it without me. And then I'll come around and help you if you have any questions. Alright, so did we get... Alright, so we started by saying that C is the midpoint of AE. Blair, that's a C. Of AE. And what reason is that? Given. Okay, now, I need to put tickies, correct? So, where am I going to put my tickies now that it's the midpoint? AC and EC. They're flipped this time. So then, I would say that AC is congruent to EC by what? Definition of midpoint. How many of us got those first 3 right? Well, first 2. Good, take a point. Alright, so then from there, what am I going to put?
Parallel to E.
Okay. So then we can put this here and this here. Now, we have parallel lines. Again, if you need to cover up and redraw, we have a parallel line here, a parallel line here, and we have a transversal here. Correct? It can be. You could also have another one, right? There's technically 2 transversals. So you could do this several ways. You can have 2 transversals that look like I don't like that. So I'm going to draw this transversal and then we'll do it the other way. Now, this is the top of one of our triangles right here. And this is the bottom of another triangle. And those are congruent because they're what kind of angles? Alternate interior, because they're on opposite sides of the transversal and inside the parallel line. So we can say
Angle ABC. EBC.
okay, so keep that because I like that. Justin did it a little different and I'm going to show you in just a second. Alternate interior angles. So he saw the transversal the other way. He saw that these 2 were parallel and then used EA or AE as his transversal. So we said that these were congruent, but you could also do it and say that these are congruent. We're going to show that in a second. Does everybody see why those 2 are congruent? Now, why would those 2 angles be congruent? They're alternate interior angles, yeah, because they're on opposite sides of this transversal and inside the parallel lines. Now, is there another angle that we know without a shadow of a doubt is congruent besides Grant? We have vertical angles, angle C. So you didn't even have to see this other parallel if you didn't, but you could say that BCA is congruent to what?
EDC.
I said BCA is congruent to DCE. Good. And what's the reasoning? by vertical angles. Now, how could we say that our triangles are congruent? Why? Good. Take a point. Does everybody agree with that and see that? Do you want me to move it down so you can see the picture? We have, now we said that this, we used vertical. So we said angle, angle, side. Angle, angle, side. But you could also say angle, angle, side, right? So there's multiple ways to do this one. Now, you and your group do number 8. I'm going to move it up. Is that better? Sorry. Blessings. I'm going to fill in part of it for you once we're all done writing this down. Yes. Put your moons first. You know what I mean? Because it's an angle bisector, right? Does it say anything about an angle bisector? So do that and put your moons for your other thing. Does it tell you which one's congruent? It says it bisects SVU, right? So what's going to be congruent? Yes, sir. I'll be right there. Say this. I'll be right there. All right, see if those two things that I gave you help. Okay, let's come together, like the Beatles. Where did all my markers? Oh, I'll put them back in here. What? Okay, guys, it starts by telling us that TV bisects SVU. Dum, dum. Does any of you watch SVU? Okay, good, thank you. So I've been singing in my head over and over. Okay, so SVU is this angle right here, correct? And then TV comes in and cuts it in half. It kills it. So that means what? What two new angles are created? SVT and UVT. Yes. So it created these two new angles right here. Does everybody see that? Yes. Yes. What, Grant? We're not done, baby. I'm like, breathe so I can write it down. Okay, so it cut the angles in half, right? Or it cut this angle in half. We have two new angles. So it says that angle SVT is congruent to angle UVT by the definition of an angle bisector. Is everybody with me? What did you write? That is the same angle. It is just backwards.
What about SVU?
SVU is the whole angle that it cut in half, so you can't use that. Okay, is everybody with me now? Are we sure? If you need to get out markers to see the different angles, get out markers. We have those. Okay, so we have one rainbow on each of these. Then it says TSV is congruent to what angle? TUV. And what reason do we know that's true? Given. Okay. Is everybody with me to there? Does everybody see how we got there? Are you sure?
Yes.
Drake, are you with me?
Yes.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Fantastic. Now, do they have anything else in common? TV. They share a side. So we would say that TV, so we went from none to 1, is congruent to what? TV. And what property is that? Reflexive. Now, finally, we have an angle aside. An angle aside. Can we say that these two things are congruent? How? Look at us go.
Wow.
Do we need to walk through that one more time? Are we sure? Does it make more sense once we use colors? For the love of God, get out colors. Are you ready for some hypotenuse leg? Yeah, you can totally do hypotenuse leg without me. Try number 9 by yourself.
She's saying it's hard.
No, I was being serious. Did it sound sarcastic?
Yes.
Oh, I'm really sorry, guys. I was being serious. Sorry about that. Love ya.
You have to write down the fact that you're right on.
Do you think that could help? Do you think that's going to need to be filled in anywhere?
I already knew it.
Okay. Does it give you that?
Yes.
So then you should write it down because it's a given, right?
Yes.
Why are we having this conversation? Okay, move out so I can. There. Yes, look at you go. Everybody should draw their box. Hey, what did you start with?
The given.
You started with the given, so I'm going to start with the first given. That triangle LKN and triangle NML are right triangles. And the reason is? Okay, so what is the right angle here?
K and M.
K and M? Okay, then what does it give us?
LK is congruent to M.
And the reason is? Should I put tickies? Okay. LK and NM.
I always forget about this.
And then what does it do? LN is congruent to NL. And what reason would that be? Reflexive or symmetric, I don't really care which one you use. It technically should be symmetric, but whatever. And then we have a hypotenuse that's congruent. We have a leg that's congruent. So how are these two triangles congruent? Hypotenuse leg. Y'all did pretty well on that. Like, everybody had this part correct. We just didn't have this part right here correct. Some of us are writing crazy things. All right, are you ready for number 10? Do you want to do it together or without me?
Without you.
Do it without me.
Yay.
Persevere in the face of danger.
Yo. Still danger.
Alright, so after the next one, that's this thing right here. You got some vertical.
Look at you killing it with your vertical angles.
We have to draw
Our boxes up in here.
Yeah, put your boxes up in there.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm so excited, children. This is a good one.
These up.
Oh, and you have 3 givens?
Yeah.
Things are crazy up in here.
Right. This is easy.
Do we feel a little better now?
I mean, this one's easy.
This one's easy?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know. I don't even know if these are right or wrong.
You're just writing stuff down?
Yeah.
You're like, I'm going for it. Oh. Are we under attack?
It's not like you got stabbed.
Was that a sneeze? Oh, bless you. Honestly, I'm afraid to move. Like, I don't know if ninjas are going to come out and stab me or if he's being murdered back there. Look at you go.
Oh man, that made my day.
Alright, if somebody at your table can get this correct, you will get 4 points.
Oh, so I give us 4 points. I already got it right. Grant, you don't even know.
Let me finish writing it down before you start saying that you got it right.
I mean, I already did though. You already checked it.
If you have it backwards, that's okay. Like, as long as you are in the...
Are you gonna come around and check and see where it is?
No.
That's why she's writing on the
That's why I wrote it. Grant, sit.
He didn't have a comeback for once.
There's a reason you're in.
Oh, children. Thank you so much.
Aw, thank you.
Oh, look, look.
We're so excited. We'll be able to look at our charts now. Thank you. Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much.
We appreciate it.
Thank you for bringing it back.
Laminated. Laminated.
So soft.
I got it right. 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 You get 4 points. You get 4 points.
Did you get it right? I know these papers doesn't say you got it right. How about do you think? Oh, see.
It's because you're a female. That's what it is.
She was always tired.
Alright, how many of us got it right? Look at us go. Make sure you gave your team 4 points. Okay, now, this weekend, look over your math workshops because you have a math workshop test on Monday. There are like 8 radical problems on there, so make sure you know how to do radicals. Well, I'm real sorry about life.
No, I said I do like it.
Oh, I thought you said you don't. I was like, well, I don't know what to tell you. I do too. They're so much fun. It's like a puzzle. But I think I'm the only one that's like that.
I got my plate. All the other ones.